want to welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Gary Thompson, and you're at the Confluence Watershed Summit. My welcome is on behalf of the McCall, Donnelly, and Cascade Chamber of Commerce, the Valley Soil and Water Conservation District, Big Payette Lake Water Quality Council Incorporated, and Friends of Lake Cascade. We all need healthy water. And Governor Little said so with his quote, "Good water quality is fundamental to prosperity in Idaho." Today is session 3 of a 4-part educational webinar series. We're going to continue as a process to provide watershed information for future planning purposes. Our format is pivoting today from providing background information, and we're going to begin to look forward a little bit, focusing more on potential solutions. The ultimate goal of the summit is to improve our watershed water quality. The expectation is that you'll be able to convene after these sessions for breakout work groups to develop specific actions to tackle different problems. How today is going to work. We're using Zoom webinar. So if you're an attendee, your audio and video are muted. Only the panelists and the moderators are going to be visible, audible, and have share screen functions. Attendees Q&A will be open and activated so that if you have a question of a panelist, you can type it in, and we're going to have time at the end of each presentation to address your questions. We're going to try to. This session and all others have been recorded for future use. If you look in the chat, we have a link available right now. You can go and see the past sessions, and you can even log in and view on YouTube the different sections that hold your interest. We want to thank our sponsors. We've got McCall, Donnelly, Cascade Chamber of Commerce, Valley Soil and Water Conservation District, Maupin Homes, the Star News, the McCall Cascade Store, Big Payette Lake Water Quality Council Incorporated, Pam and Ralph Thier, and Friends of Lake Cascade. In addition, we would like to acknowledge the creative services provided by McHale McKenzie Incorporated and facilitation services of Redfish Bluefish. We are 2 McCall consulting firms helping out with this summit process, and we're very glad to be here. I'm going to screen share the agenda for today. Let me see here. Okay, you can see today we're going to be looking at draft legislation on Big Payette and Cascade Lakes Councils Act. We'll look at the Payette Land Trust with Craig Utter. We're going to talk about septic systems, EQIP, Water Smart, and other water quality programs, technical assistance and water quality loan program. And then we're going to talk about conserve, protect, and restore cold water fisheries and watersheds. That'll take us to noon, and we'll have a few minutes for Q&A. Okay, I'm going to introduce our first speaker. Again, the title of this session is Draft Legislation, Big Payette and Lake Cascades Councils Act, Cascade Lakes Councils Act. Roy Eiguren will be presenting. Roy Eiguren is a graduate of the Executive Management Program with the Dartmouth School of Business Administration and attended Georgetown University College of Law and the University of Idaho College of Law, where he received his Juris Doctorate. He is both a former Deputy Attorney General and Idaho Deputy Secretary of State and Deputy Prosecuting Attorney for Ada County. As founder of the Eiguren Public Policy, a law firm in Boise, he has an unsurpassed record of successful public issues management, lobbying, and regulatory coordination and public policy law outcomes. Mr. Eiguren is an active member of the Valley County community, donating much of his time to water quality issues and helping to write the original 1993 Big Payette Lake Water Quality Act. Mr. Eiguren, thank you for joining us, and please take it away.
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank all of the sponsors of this summit. It's been an excellent exercise, long overdue, and so I compliment all of you who have made this happen. I think it's a real plus. As was mentioned in the opening, I was involved with the development of the Big Payette Lake Water Quality Act in 1993. The reason for that is twofold. One is a very good friend of mine, now deceased, Peter Johnson, was my boss when we worked together in the federal government back at the Bonneville Power Administration back in the 1980s. So when Peter returned home from Portland and had stint as Bonneville administrator, I also came back to Idaho. At that time, I acquired property on Big Payette Lake, and so both Peter and I were property owners on Big Payette. We were concerned about the deterioration in water quality of the lake at that particular point in time. And so we did some considerable research on ways within which there might be some type of legislation that would address water quality on Big Payette Lake. And the end result was the two of us drafting the legislation that did become law in 1993. That act created an 11-person water quality council that was composed of local citizens as well as local government officials. It was charged with the development of two things. One was a comprehensive study of water quality in the lake, and the second was a long-term water quality management plan that was based upon the recommendations and findings that came from the study. The council received no state or local funding from the government. It was all privately funded. There was some money that came from the United States USGS that provided the funding for a study that was conducted by a limnologist with the USGS by the name of Dr. Paul Woods. That was a very detailed two-season study that came back with results that showed that there had been some deterioration in the water quality of the lake, in large part due to factors associated with nutrient loading. The council developed a water quality lake management plan that did derive from the council, and it was very, very detailed. That plan took some considerable period of time in being established by members of the council, assisted by a technical advisory panel consisting of federal, state, and local officials who played a very significant and very instrumental role in development of the lake management plan. By operation of law, the council disbanded after a period of time. The concept was that once the plan had been developed by the council, that then it would be a matter of local, state, and federal officials taking the plan and implementing it on an ongoing basis. There was also a provision made for the various groups to get together on an annual basis to report progress on the various items that were contained in the plan. The plan also provided for the act, I should say, provided for very extensive public involvement, public education. You may recall that there were a number of brochures and posters and other things that were produced back in the 1990s and early 2000 timeframe that talked about ways within which the citizenry could take actions to improve water quality in the lake, such things as not using any phosphated fertilizer, lawns, things of that nature. That worked out quite well, and it was a very active public involvement program. As the plan was developed well over 2 decades ago now, it is somewhat stale, if you will. In addition to that, as may have already been said in this summit prior to now, there is an ongoing University of Idaho study being conducted by Dr. Frank Wilhelm, who I believe, in fact, did appear in the summit proceedings. And Dr. Wilhelm is actively involved in a 2-year study along with a graduate student to do essentially a replication of what Dr. Paul Woods did back in the late 1990s. The end result will be a series of recommendations and findings that will need to be implemented. And so it was with that concept in mind that I began working with the rest of the parties in bringing legislation, which is now House Bill 113 to the legislature this year to do two things. One is to reestablish the Big Payette Lake Water Quality Council so that it could receive the plan from Dr. Wilhelm and begin the process of updating that long-term lake management plan. And secondly, for the first time, establish a water quality council for Payette Lake, or excuse me, I'm sorry, for Cascade Lake.
Excuse me, Roy.
Yes.
Apologies for the interruption. Your audio appears to be skipping a little bit.
Oh, okay.
Sure if it's
I'm
the
not sure what to
bandwidth
do.
or the. If it gets worse, I might interrupt you again, and we might have to just turn off your video.
Okay.
If it can't get through.
Well, let's just go ahead and I can turn off the video. Why don't we just do that and see if that helps a little bit.
Sounds good.
So back to where I was at, and I'm sorry for the skip there. Back to where I was at is that we did introduce legislation week before last, House Bill 113, which is designed to bring back both the Big Payette Lake Water Quality Council and establish one for Lake Cascade. We had very strong support for that legislation from a variety of parties, the local governments, Friends of Lake Cascade, the Big Payette Lake Water Quality Council Incorporated, among others, Trout Unlimited, the Wildlife Foundation. Very good, strong, solid, broad-based support, and a lot of support from local citizens for the council. Unfortunately, at the late hour, the Idaho Water Users Association came upon the legislation and had a number of significant objections to it based upon their concerns that in some way the Lake Cascade Water Quality Council would impact operations of both the Bureau Rec as well as the irrigation districts that were represented by the Water Users Association. So rather than getting in a protracted battle at the legislature, I decided not to move forward with the legislation this particular year, but rather step back and do a couple things. One is work with water users to see if there are ways within which we can overcome their objections to the Lake Cascade Water Quality Council, and also to work through some issues that came up with the Big Payette Lake Water Quality Council. It may be, candidly, that rather than going back to the legislature next year, we can address some of these issues through the establishment of WAGs. I had just realized, or just learned actually, in the last several days that the Big Payette Lake Water Quality Council was succeeded by a WAG, a Big Payette Lake Water Quality Group that was Watershed Advisory Group that was put together by DEQ. So I've had conversations with the director of DEQ about the possibility of, after the session, a group of us working with DEQ to see what ways we might be able to, from an administrative and an executive branch standpoint, develop forums that we could essentially conduct the same sort of business that would be conducted by the Payette and Lake Cascade Water Quality Councils. Because at the end of the day, the Water Quality Councils really are designed to be a forum, a venue for all parties' interests to come together and have a collective discussion about the holistic ways that need to be employed to improve water quality in both bodies of water. In my judgment, that's something that has been missing for a period of time. I know that's true with others that I've worked with in the development of this legislation. And so all of that being said, I think that we'll continue to move forward, and either we'll resolve the concerns through, as I'd mentioned, executive branch action, or we may come back next year with legislation to deal with the water quality councils. I do think that probably, given the rather significant differences in the composition and makeup of the two lakes, we would want to have probably separate legislation. One bill that would deal with Big Payette, and one bill that would deal with Lake Cascade. So with that, Gary, that is my prepared remarks. I would be more than glad to respond to questions that people might have.
Excellent. Thank you for your presentation. Let's look, does anyone, our attendees, have any questions? You can post them in the Q&A box. Or do any of our panelists have any questions? I can't let a guest go without any questions. That's a missed opportunity. Mr. Eiguren, how about like looking forward, 20 years down the road, what would you like to see happen in regards to water quality on both lakes or this part of the watershed?
Well, a couple things. One is I really do believe we need to have this robust, comprehensive, collective discussion that I'm talking about. The governor mentioned that in his opening remarks about how important it is to be collaborative in the development of water quality programs. And not to say that some of that's not ongoing now, but I do think the establishment of a comprehensive active WAG and or a council would be a major step in improvement of water quality. And then I would like to see very active programs involving best management practices, other activities that would relate to the improvement of water quality, all actively and comprehensively moving forward, that are well funded. I think one of the issues I've noticed over time is that so much of what needs to be done is not funded in some way. And I've had conversations with legislators and with other interested parties about trying to find some mechanisms over the longer term that would provide funding for enhanced water quality, particularly in some of these major bodies of water like the two lakes that we're talking about here in Valley County.
Excellent, thank you. We've got 3 questions in our Q&A. One is, would you hope to establish one WAG for the entire watershed, or do you envision multiple?
I envision multiple. Just the research that has been done over the last week literally shows that there is a WAG in place for Big Payette Lake. And so my intent is to kind of aggressively follow up as to why it's not been functioning. The documents I saw, which were signed by the director of the department back in 2004, did establish one WAG for Big Payette Lake. I think a separate one needs to be established for Lake Cascade. What I've learned in this experience is that even though there's a commonality between the two lakes in terms of some of these water quality issues, I do think that they are very unique and separate bodies of water that require different types of approaches that I think would come from the WAGs.
So I think you've got a few more questions. What are some specific objections that the water users have put on the table?
Well, their most significant objection related to the WAGs. They believe that the councils would be redundant and duplicative of what a WAG would do. And so that was why, among other reasons, they thought that this would be a problem. Their concern was that in some way, the actions from a council would impact key issues to them, which is the drawdown of water from Lake Cascade for irrigation purposes and for fish flush. They felt that there could be a possibility that the councils in some way would have a negative impact on that. We didn't really get to a level of discussion where we talked about specifics there, but that was a concern that they had in some considerable measure. So those are the key issues that they have that we're going to spend some time working through and either get a WAG or legislation.
Thank you. The stage is set for a watershed advisory group regardless of future legislation. You've kind of talked about this a little bit, but see any difference in what the WAG and legislation could accomplish?
As a practical matter, probably not. I think the point made by the water users is a relevant one, and that is that there is redundance between the two. However, the fact that the councils would be gubernatorially appointed, I think that kind of rises their stature, if you will, in terms of their ability to address particular issues. It also very specifically called out that the council is to conduct a study and to develop a long-term water quality plan. That's not contained in the WAG statute, but that's not to say that administratively a WAG could not perform those same functions. And so that's a part of what the research is going to be. That's a part of what the dialogue is going to be starting at the end of this legislative session with DEQ. I do want to compliment DEQ. They were extremely helpful in the development of the statutory language that became House Bill 113. I worked with the director and members of his staff. They're clearly committed to improving water quality and are looking ways for that to be done. Where I left it with the director is, as I'd mentioned earlier, we'll begin this dialogue and do some additional research starting after the legislative session to see if there are executive branch ways to get the same thing done that a legislative council would do.
Okay. Let's see, we've got two more questions. We've got just enough time for that. Warm Lake has been discovered by tourism to the extreme. As a cabin owner at Warm Lake, I lost 24 inches of shoreline last summer due to wake surf boats, wake boats, and jet skis. Can something be done immediately to restrict these water vessels from the lake? Phosphorus is being disturbed from the shoreline and the lake bottom, contributing to algae bloom in addition to the aforementioned. Any thoughts on Warm Lake?
Yeah, I do. And I first, I want to compliment the Valley County Commission in that, as you may or may not know, they have just recently concluded an RFP process within which they have retained a consultant to help them with those particular issues. They want to develop a comprehensive lake management plan for all of the major lakes in the county, including Warm Lake. And one of the things that they're going to address specifically is the impact of these wave boats, these wet boats as they're known, on shoreline erosion, on turbidity, on other problems associated with water quality. So that's one answer. There is a process ongoing that, as I understand it, is going to take 2 years. Secondly, and I think very importantly, Dr. Wilhelm, in his work on Big Payette Lake, will have as one of the deliverables from that study a formula, a process by which certain inputs can be made into an allocation formula or into a formula. And that formula will then derive what the no wake zone should be for a boat from the shoreline, because it's not a one size fits all. The current 300-foot no wake zone for the lakes is not one that's going to work throughout all of the lakes. And so his study, I think, will be very instrumental in terms of developing that mechanism, which then can be used by the commissioners in this process that I just described.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you for your time and your presentation. We've got a few questions in the Q&A. If you can look at that, we'll try to answer those, but I'm going to keep going on to our next presenter with the Payette Land Trust. Again, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Okay. So this next section is titled the Payette Land Trust as an Alternative. Craig Utter, Executive Director of the Payette Land Trust, will be presenting. Craig grew up in the small mountain town of Evergreen, Colorado, not unlike McCall. He owned and operated a ranch in the Sandhills of Nebraska before moving here in 2006 to work for the Forest Service as a firefighter with the Crassel helicopter crew. He has worked 3 seasons in Antarctica at McMurdo Research Station, providing cargo and helicopter support to the National Science Foundation. He also works for the Sand County Foundation, coordinating the Nebraska Leopold Conservation Award, which recognizes landowner achievement in voluntary conservation. Craig became the executive director for the Payette Land Trust in November of 2017. Craig, take it away.
Thanks, Gary. I really appreciate it. And thanks everyone for providing this format to talk about the Payette River Basin. I'm going to share a screen. So I hope that's coming across good. I think what I want to start with real quick is some information about the Payette Land Trust. So some quick stats about us, because I'm sure there's some folks out there maybe who are unfamiliar with us, but we've been around for 28 years. We work in 4 counties. We are property owners. We own 2 properties that were donated to the land trust. We currently hold about 10 easements on private property, and we're working on 5 more easements. We have a volunteer board of 8 members and 1 full-time staff person. And you can see that we work right in the heart of Idaho, and water quality and these issues we're talking about today are really core to what we're trying to accomplish. We have 3 major river systems in our working area. So that's the Payette River Basin, the Weiser River Basin, and the Little Salmon River Basin. So we're kind of right at the the headwaters of a lot of the water that goes on down to the Columbia. And our main goal as a nonprofit is to work with private landowners. So we function mainly in that world of working with folks who own land, who want to see their conservation ethic, moved off into the future. One thing that we like to talk about is that the Payette Land Trust thinks in perpetuity. As a land trust, all of our easements are in perpetuity, and that's our mindset. So we really look at what we're doing, the people that we work with, and the projects that we take on have to really live for the lifetime. Our easements are attached to the property, so they're deed restricted, which means that as a private landowner may sell their ranch, their farm, their house, their timber property, whatever that might be, our easement stays with that piece of property, and it extends off into the future and future landowners. So that's one of our jobs, is to steward the easements forward and work with those landowners that come after the folks who decide to place an easement on their property. One of the things that the Land Trust does is really try and work on building broad relationships, because we work with all different kinds of folks on all different kinds of lands. A land trust, in a sense, is always about 20 years behind. And what I mean by that is once we become involved in a project, it's usually because development has started to put pressure on a working farm or ranch or a timber parcel or somebody's individual piece, and they're feeling that the development is coming and they want to do something to secure their ethic on their property. And of us unveiling that to Governor Little in June of 2019. And it was on the shores of the Payette Lake where we did this. Why do we want to work within this area? Well, as everybody's talked about, this Payette River Basin is key to water quality. It's key to agriculture, and it's really key to the economic development of our county here. So the focus area of the PLT is looking at a half-mile buffer around the river and the lakes, from the inlet of Payette Lake to the Cabarton Bridge. And that's a self-imposed buffer. We kind of decided that we would like to talk to anybody who has properties within that area. Doesn't have to exist fully within that area, but we want to talk to people and say, what can we do to conserve your land as it is, and then work to improve it. So the Payette Land Trust already has some properties that we've worked with in this area. This is why we want to focus on it. We want to expand on the positive work that we've done. These two existing conservation easements on the Nahas and the Blackhawk, as you can see here, have been around for a while. These are started back in 07 and 08, but we've had 653 acres of conservation that has prevented development along the river. And in the last few years, as we've become more of an active group, we said, how can we link these? And if we can link these conservation easements through a corridor, can we do that all the way from the inlet of the Payette Lake down to the Cabarton Bridge? So when we started to think about that, we said, okay, what are the main project areas that we feel like we can gain support and partnership on? Because we know that we don't do this in a vacuum. By conserving land through a conservation easement, it allows for other opportunities to exist into the future. So the three areas that we really picked to decide to focus on were the Payette River Access Project. And if you've spent any time looking at ownership along the Payette River, you know that a lot of it is in private ownership. It's very difficult to access the Payette River. And in reality, you can get on the Payette River at the Sheep Bridge across from the jump base, but it gets very difficult to get off of the Payette River. There aren't very many places you can do that. So if you float the river, if you want to stick within the bounds of the law, you have to float down to Smiley Bridge to get out. And that's a significant flow. It's about 8 river miles. Now, traditionally, a lot of us don't necessarily do it that way. There are traditional pullouts where nobody really cared if you pulled out or not, but they're all private. And with the change in the trespassing laws, with the change in ownership, as people start to pay significantly more for land along the river, you know, they're not going to want to see you pull out in their backyard. So we're trying to figure out ways of creating access points, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Payette Lake Conservation Project, if you've paid any attention to what's going on with endowment lands over the last couple of years, you know that area around Payette Lake, most of it is in endowment, and there's questions about how that land will be managed into the future. Ironically, PLT got involved with this issue before the Trident folks came along, and we were lucky to have some understanding and insight to how we might be able to play a part. We'll talk about that in a little bit as well. And then we want to look to conserve the agricultural heritage within the basin. And we really look at ag corridors as being hugely important because they also provide wildlife corridors and the potential for access as well. We see that ag land is the primary area where we convert from open space to development. So I want to focus real quick on the Payette River Access Project and what we can do as a land trust thinking ahead into the future. So this area that we're looking at is 44 acres off Moonridge Drive, and it's nestled within some subdivisions. It was supposed to be another subdivision. At one point it had 44 homes planned on it. And over the years, it just never happened for a lot of reasons. But the Payette Land Trust went in and looked at it and said, this is a key area. It's one of the bigger intact pieces of property that also has access to Moonridge Drive. What can we do? So it was listed at 1.2 million. The PLT found some conservation buyers who went in, negotiated down the price, and are willing to put conservation easements on it and then resell it to the community for about $350,000, which is incredible because 44 acres along the Payette River right now would probably bring more than 1.2 million, and it would have homes and restrict access. So we've effectively, through the use of conservation easements, removed about $850,000 worth of value. And what I mean by that is the owners are receiving value through a tax incentive that comes with donating a conservation easement, but it gets the community in at a price that we can afford. So we're starting to embark on a fundraising campaign in conjunction with the Payette River Walk Alliance, which is a group that was formed by individuals who will benefit from this to open this up to the public. And you can find out more about that at the PayetteRiverWalk.org. The Payette Lake Conservation Project, the one part of the endowment issue that the Land Trust is really focusing on, are going to be Parcel H and Parcel G. And the reason we're focusing on this area is that we feel it's a piece that we might have success with, and it really conserves all of Eastside Drive. As you'll note, these values that IDL, the Idaho Department of Lands, has put out in their Payette Endowment Land Strategy that was put before the Land Board in December, shows that the development value has really outweighed the timber value. And so it puts this property in a space where they need to have revenue gap filled. So the Land Trust says, well, we'll try and do that through the purchase of a conservation easement at full market value, which would involve, raising those funds. But currently, there's no avenue for conservation easements on endowment property. So how do we do that? We're working with IDL to have an avenue created. It's very complex. It's never been done before. A lot of legal questions, but we decided we just have to start somewhere to figure it out. So the Land Trust is working to do just that, to put in an application on these two properties, find out if we can have an easement. The easement would allow for traditional uses, so logging, agriculture, recreation could still exist in this area. And we're trying to find ways to partner and keep these lands open, because again, we know that logging, grazing, recreation doesn't happen in somebody's backyard. So if this turns over to development, those potential leases and uses that IDL may have in the future disappear, as well as it really does change the landscape for the area. And, the underlying component to all this is, again, water quality. By limiting development, we can also provide the opportunity to have avenues to increase water quality. The third project area under the initiative is agricultural heritage. These stats are some quick ones that I threw up from the American Farmland Trust, but what it really starts to talk about, it's something that we already know. Idaho is changing. People are moving here, and the place that they want to come to isn't prepared to handle the influx of private residents. We're doing a great job of finding a way to increase our economic development. So the opportunities for jobs are coming. Idaho is one of the last states that was sort of discovered in the West. So we're seeing that, we're feeling it. I grew up with that in Colorado. As Denver came out of its slump in the 80s, the boom to live in the mountains just was overwhelming. And we saw these small towns just being inundated with people moving to the area. So I think one of the things that we're working with is trying to find programs that are already in existence, and through NRCS, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, and through the Farm Bill, there's a program called ALE, Agricultural Land Easement Program. And this helps fund the purchase of easements of agricultural landowners. The problem with this is there's not enough money allocated to Idaho for all the need, and it takes a lot of work, and having staff to help these landowners navigate these very complex federal programs is difficult. So we have to figure out how to change that for us. It's a good thing, or it's a good way to think about conversion of agricultural land, is that a house is the last thing you'll ever plant on a piece of property. So if you can conserve agricultural areas, you still have all the opportunities for restoration, habitat improvement, all those sorts of things. By no means is the Payette Land Trust anti-development. We just think there's places that development makes sense, and there's other places we should leave alone from that development. So we're really an on-the-ground organization that tries to find balance. How do we find this balance in the areas that we want to see conservation happen? And as Gary really mentioned, it's a vision for the future. So what do we see for the future? I think by focusing on agriculture, wildlife, access corridors adjacent to water, whether it's the Payette River Basin, whether it's the Weezer River Basin or the Little Salmon, that we can bring together all of the folks who want to see some form of conservation happen. We can bring those together. We can look at conservation easements, stem the tide of development in those areas, at the same time actually increasing the possibility for economics in our area. How do we do this? We're going to need to see more staff from our standpoint. We're going to have to really look at upping our conservation areas that we can affect. And we're going to have to start dealing with what everybody's dealing with, and that is funding. How do we get acquisition funds started? How can we join together to make those funds go farther? Some ideas are water funds. We see that used effectively out east, eastern part of the US, to look at downstream water users that benefit from conservation on the upstream. I think we all know that conservation is cheaper than restoration. I believe Duke Energy did a little bit of a study on that, and it costs them 8 times to restore an area versus conserve it in the first place. So we want to move Idaho in that area and work with our current landowners. And we want to see more public access on these waterways so that we can really have that feeling of connectivity, because I think that's important as well, as we have all the new folks who are moving into this area. With that, there are all kinds of things to talk about, Gary. I'm going to stop my screen share there and try and answer some questions. I think I've got a few minutes left, and we'll sort of do the best we can.
Yeah, no, this is great. And again, it's all about engagement. So just having time to get the attendees involved is fantastic. We've got a question right now. It says, does the Payette Land Trust implement retiring federal and/or state grazing rights associated with private property? This would be similar to the Nature Conservancy purchasing the 45 ranch in Owyhee County, then retiring it or reducing cattle grazing, and finally reselling the property to private interests with restrictions and easements in place. This allowed additional funding for the Nature Conservancy to purchase additional lands, recycling the benefits.
I think that's a question that usually goes with a specific property. That specific property had that opportunity. I would say that our first and foremost priority is to work with the landowners, whoever has that property, whether it's a agricultural interest or even just a single piece of private land that's 40 acres that somebody wants to conserve, and say, what do you want to see happen? What do you have? What is your ethic going forward? We want to find balance. So if having those grazing rights attached and somehow retiring them is a benefit to the balance of the area, that would be a consideration. Is it a main goal? Not necessarily. We want to see our agricultural properties continue to operate and be vibrant. That is what adds to this part of Idaho. This is what adds to the wildlife corridors, as well as the ag corridors and the scenic and open views. So that's a really specific question that goes with a specific piece of property. And if that came up, we'd think about it, but it's not a driver.
And I've got 2 questions quickly. How does PLT or the Payette Land Trust raise funds, and how are those funds currently being used? You got 30 seconds for that one. And the next one is, tell me about what the Payette Land Trust thinks about wildlife corridor mapping.
So funding, we're nonprofit. Right now, we live off the generous donations of people in the area. Currently, those funds go to our general operations. If we have funds that go specifically towards a project, we have fund accounting, which we can allocate those funds for specific projects. So that's acquisition of easements, things like that. So donate. We also write grants and try and find matching dollars for those. As far as wildlife corridor mapping, I think the more we become involved with partners who can provide those tools to us, we work with a lot of pro bono right now. So the GIS that goes with wildlife corridor mapping. We can overlay that with development that can help provide even more of a reason to focus on conserving an area. The more, the better.
Excellent. Thank you, Craig. Thanks for your presentation. There's one more question that I think you'll definitely want to answer in the Q&A. If you find that on your lower screen, you can kind of open that up and type a response in. But we're going to go on to Peter.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Gary.
Okay, let me see here. 10:45, 10:46, Peter. We cut into your time a little bit. This is, we're going to talk about septic systems with Peter Adams, a wastewater analyst with the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality. Peter is a wastewater analyst with the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality. I just heard the same thing twice. Well, we know who Peter is. Peter, take it away. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Gary. And I'm just getting over a cold, so I apologize if my voice is a little shaky, but I am a geologist by training. I'm the on-site wastewater coordinator for DEQ. So I work with the all 7 health departments, including Central District Health and the DEQ regional offices on wastewater issues and septic permitting issues. I'm going to talk today about failing septic systems. Let me see if I can share that. Does that look good? Okay, just making sure it's on the screen. All right, so I wanted to, in the interest of keeping things simple and not getting overly technical, I wanted to start the presentation off with how a septic system works, because a lot of people don't really, know exactly how it works. So I'll just do that really quickly. Before I do that, we can go over some of the things I'm going to talk about in the next 10 to 15 minutes. I'm going to talk about how septic systems work, just kind of an overview of them and drain fields. I have some Valley County specific septic data that I wanted to share. Then the kind of meat of the presentation is what is the cost of a septic system failing, especially when a lot of them fail in a small area. And then at the end, we're going to talk about what we can do, some options, and then I will take questions. So just to start off, this is a picture of a standard septic tank. They don't always have the divider in the middle, but this is kind of how they work. Septage from a house or a property goes into the inlet and collects, and the solids are put at the bottom, are filtered out at the bottom, and then the effluent goes out the outlet pipe. So the purpose of this design is to keep all the solids at the bottom and not going into the drain field where it can get clogged. There's some other things in here that you may or may not have, like an effluent filter, but this is the basic design. This is a graphic of how a drain field typically looks. So you can see here you've got your septic tank coming from the house, and then from the septic tank you have your drain field. And this is just a typical drain field. It's just some trenches with gravel in it. Again, I'm being very simplistic just for the sake of not getting too technical, but all the solids collect in the septic tank, and then the wastewater, the effluent, comes and seeps into the ground over time through the drain field. And the idea, and when it works, it works, but the idea is that the soil is enough to filter out any sort of contaminants and pollutants before it gets into groundwater. And that's a big problem if there's shallow groundwater, but I won't get into that. This is a standard system. So, and we can come back to that if anyone has any questions about it. This is based on a recent, we do audits every year of different health districts and how many permits they issue. And as you can see, like everyone has been saying, Idaho is booming right now. You can see it went from in 2019 being around 80 septic permits issued in Valley County to over 140. So not quite double, but Central District Health was very busy. And not all of these are new permits. Some of them are repair permits or expansions, but the majority of them are new. So I just wanted to show this. I realize that parts of the area we're talking about might be in Adams County or others, but generally it's mostly in Valley County. So I wanted to show this. Development is around, Donnelly, Cascade, McCall, and all areas in the county. This is just a very telling graph that we have to keep up with this kind of thing, because if we just, get lax and don't innovate and don't come up with new ways to keep the public safe and the environment safe, more and more septic systems are going to get installed and possibly fail. So this is a summary of what we basically are trying to do at DEQ and the health districts. Septic systems are considered failing when it doesn't protect health, safety, and the environment of the people of Idaho. The system fails to accept black waste and wastewater, so if it's blocked or you lose access to it, that kind of thing. Or the system discharges wastewater into the waters of the state, such as Lake Cascade or the Payette River, or under the ground surface. And below you have a kind of a standard picture of what it looks like. Sign that if you see this in your yard, you need to contact the health district. This is a bad sign, especially if you know that your septic tank or drain field is in this area. This means that this is full of solids, or this pipe right here is blocked, or the pipe leading to the drain field. And so what happens then is if all of this gets full of solids or this gets blocked, that wastewater has to go somewhere. So it's going to come and, oops, sorry guys. It's going to come out on the ground surface right here, or if it's near a stream, it's going to just run off into the stream or lake. So that's a bad thing. Replacing a system that is filled is really expensive, especially if you haven't saved for it. I mean, it has to happen to everybody. Every property, their septic system is designed at maximum to last 30 years, which is kind of a shocker to a lot of people. A lot of people hear that and they're like, well, I've had the system for, I've lived here for 35 years and never even thought about it. And well, you're very fortunate. It's kind of a miracle that your system hasn't failed if you've never pumped it or never done anything to it. But generally, every 20 to 30 years, septic drain fields have to be replaced. This is kind of a standard picture of a gravelless drain field being installed on a property, and it's just to kind of give you an idea of what goes into replacing a drain field. So this next section I'm going to talk about is the cost of failing systems. What happens when a septic system fails in regards to the cost to public health and the cost to the environment. So public health wise, there's kind of two big things that can happen. There's nitrates that get released into the groundwater and surface water. Nitrates, you might have heard of this thing called blue baby syndrome. It's rare, but it can happen, and it happens when newborns are exposed to drinking water that have high nitrates, and it essentially limits their oxygen, the way that they can process oxygen. That's kind of, I guess, the pun intended, no poster child of nitrate contamination, but there are other problems with it as well. The other issue is E. coli, total coliform fecal coliform. These things in themselves are generally are not as harmless as some of the other things, but they're used as an easy test to tell if there's other pathogens in the water. So obviously E. coli can make you sick, but not all types, and fecal coliform, not all types. These are just the indicators that there's other problems, other contaminants in your wastewater. And obviously I put this picture on here because if these contaminants get into surface water, dogs, cows, any sort of other livestock drink this water and get sick, as has happened in the past. So as far as solutions, what can we do? There's a couple things we can do. One really good option is to test local private wells around Lake Cascade and around the area. These wells can be sampled for nitrates and E. coli, and that kind of helps you map out where the sources of contamination are coming. It helps you figure out if there is a failing septic system nearby, or if there's an entire neighborhood of failing septic systems, that kind of thing. And these tests have been done in the past. And like I said, testing for total coliform is a really easy test, and it helps save the cost of testing for some of the more complicated pathogens. Another thing that we do every year is spread awareness about septic pumping. And this is kind of the meat of my presentation. My big takeaway, I guess, is pump your tank every 3 to 5 years is what should be happening. And you'd be amazed. There's people, like I mentioned, who have never pumped their septic tank and they just somehow miraculously have it kept working. And there's other people that, you know, it's come back to bite them and then they've had to expensive replacement costs. So septic tanks, no matter the system, no matter if you think you're the exception, have it pumped at least every 5 years. And then the other thing we do in conjunction with the EPA is we participate in Septic Smart Week, which is an information campaign for all intents and purposes. It's we provide flyers and infographics and information to whoever wants it, essentially, and you can distribute these things. You know, go to mailboxes and just put a flyer in, and it says, I have an example of it later in the presentation, but the flyers just say, you know, how to be a good septic owner, what you need to be doing year by year. But again, big takeaway is septic tank pumping. That really helps keep them from failing. There is also a couple other more difficult options, but they're definitely possible. You can consider a local ordinance, whether at county level, city level, something like that, requiring septic maintenance and reporting. And this is something that's been done with plenty of our neighbors and a lot of other states, particularly Alaska and Montana are two good examples. And I provided some links at the end of this presentation for how they handle it, but it's simple enough, especially, I believe it's, I can't remember the county in Montana, but one of the counties has established an ordinance where you have to report to the county or to the health district that you got your tank pumped within 5 years, 3 to 5 years. And it just helps them keep track of, you know, who's being a good septic owner and taking care of their neighbors, because that's what this is all about. This isn't about your property. This is about your neighbors and your neighbors' pets and livestock and all that. So we're as the Department of Environmental Quality, our main goals are to protect the environment and public health. So with that in mind, Montana, Alaska, Wisconsin, Minnesota, a couple other states have established ordinances that require certain notifications. Some of them require septic inspections as a part of property sales. We currently don't do that as a whole in Idaho, but that's a really good thing to, especially now that Idaho is growing and especially the Long Valley area, having a septic inspection as a part of a property sale would be really beneficial to everyone involved, the buyer, the seller, and the public. So that's something to consider. And then the last one is the most difficult one, but it's the best option, is establishing a sewer district. You know, instead of having everyone around the lake be on septic, have a sewer line installed. And I realize that's difficult, but I wanted to mention it because that's one of the best ways to combat contaminants getting into surface water, is just not even put it in the ground at all. Funding, this is these are a couple of options that are available for individuals and small governments. The Idaho State Revolving Fund has a household septic program, and this is based on income. And so if for instance people around Cascade or Donnelly or wherever are financially unable to replace their failing system, they can apply for either a grant or a loan through this program. I believe it's based on income cutoffs, so it's something like if you make $20-something thousand a year per household, you get a grant, so you don't have to pay it back, up to $15,000, or if you make less than $50,000 a year, you get a very low interest loan. So that's something to, just as information to pass along to residents, that you know, something to keep in mind. And I think I'm running out of time, so I'll move on. The next one is the USDA Water and Waste Disposal Loan and Grant Program. This is similar. This is more available to local governments, nonprofits, really long-term, really low interest loans, something for city government and counties to look into. This is an example of the Septic Smart Week flyer that can be distributed to different houses around Long Valley. It's a great thing to keep in mind for Septic Smart Week is fall of 2021, so about August or September. And you can contact me to get this kind of information. And then at the end, I included all my links and just another reminder to pump your tank. This is a recap of what we talked about. Thanks. That's my presentation, and I'm ready to take some questions now.
Excellent. Thanks, Peter. Pump your tanks. We're just going to make that the new hashtag for the whole summit. We do have some good questions in the Q&A. We have about 5 minutes. We'll try to answer what we can. And if we can't get to anything, if you can just log in and you can type a response as well. We'll go to this. Let's see. Where can one get coliform and nitrate testing that is reliable and cost effective?
There's different third-party companies and labs around Idaho that will do that. I know of a few. I can't recommend anyone as a government employee, but this is available and I can provide information. If someone wants to email me, I can give a list of this kind of thing. But it's very commonly done. Not so much the nitrate testing, but the E. coli and coliform. It's not expensive, and there's a lot of labs and even companies that will come out to the property and do this.
Excellent. It's my understanding that septic systems are designed to remove pathogens, not nutrients. Is there new technology coming that removes both?
Well, as far as nutrients, I'm not really sure what that's implying, but yes, they are designed to remove pathogens. So the earth is just a natural filter, especially if you have the right soil type, and as long as there's enough of it, it actually works really well, as long as it's installed correctly. The problem is if it's installed, in high groundwater and not planned, they don't plan for that, or if it's installed too close to a stream, or if it's installed in unsuitable soil, or if it's just never been pumped, it could leak out into the ground. So that's kind of some of the ways that pathogens can fail to be filtered.
Thanks. Sorry for my cough. How many septic systems are there in Valley County?
I don't know that number off the top of my head, but there are a lot more than there were last year.
So we'll keep going with the lightning round. Nitrogen reducing technology for septics exists and is available. That's a post. Thank you. Then Peter, thanks for a great presentation. What is the, I think it's filtration rate or filtration rate of septic systems?
I think he's trying to say failure rate.
Failure, thanks.
So that number is similar to the national number. And like I said, it's about 20 to 30 years as long as it's being maintained properly. I mean, you see them fail within a couple years if they're installed incorrectly, or if they're putting more wastewater in than was permitted, or if it's just not being pumped, it could fail in less than 10 years. But generally, on average, if it's done well and pumped out, 20 to 30 years.
And then, do we have any idea of the extent to which septic systems are contributing to nutrients and are contributing nutrients into the waters in Valley County?
So that's always been kind of a point of contention, right? Is like who is actually contaminating the lake and the river? And there's been some studies on that. I can't really comment on that, but it is part of the whole package. This is all things that have to be done together. And it's not just septic systems failing. It's not just livestock. It's everything all together. And our job is to protect the environment as a whole and the public health. So anything we can do to limit that from the septic standpoint is a good thing.
Excellent. Well, Peter, thank you for your time. If you look in the Q&A, there's still quite a few more questions for you. So if you can take a crack at those, we appreciate it.
Thank you.
Everyone, we have a little bit of a schedule change. So hang on to your hats. Things are getting crazy here at the Watershed Summit. Next, Ron Brooks is going to move to the latter part of our panel. And up next, we're going to have Bill Lillibridge. This presentation is Technical Assistance in the Water Quality Loan Program. This is from the Idaho Soil and Water Conservation Commission. Bill is a professional engineer and has provided engineering services, including best management practices on many conservation projects throughout the state of Idaho, and in particular is a valuable resource for Valley Soil and Water Conservation District. Bill, take it away.
All right, thank you, Gary. Again, my name is Bill Lillibridge, work for the Idaho Soil and Water Conservation Commission. I was asked to talk about technical assistance. And technical assistance is what's available out there for the landowners and managers to address their resource concerns. So most of them, they know they've got a problem, and what do we do about it? So there's 6 major components to looking at resource concerns and how to address them. We start with a field assessment. Go out and just take a look at what's going on, discuss with the landowner their goals. From that, we can talk about how that fits in to put some sidebars as far as what they want to do on the ground and what kind of constraints exist, financial, regulatory, even the landowner's needs. Then you move on to design work, and it can be something that's a formal design that might come from me as an engineer. It could just be a prescriptive design, things that they can do that are low tech, low cost, and easy to do, and talk about different best management practices. From there, it'll evolve into the fun stuff, the project permitting. A lot of these, if they're associated with waterways, have required permits from Department of Water Resources or BLM or Idaho Department of Land, and even the Army Corps of Engineers. On to funding, and we've talked a little bit about that. I know Ron Brooks will be talking about EQIP contracts later, but there's a lot of funding sources out there, everything from federal grants to local nonprofits that provide project funding. And finally getting there and putting it on the ground. Working with the contractors beforehand to make sure everything's lined out, oversight during the project, post-construction certification. So all these different things are part of dealing with resource concern, and that's a lot to do. And where do you go to do that as a landowner? Where do you go? Well, there's a lot of partnerships out there, and the Valley Soil and Water Conservation District works with a multitude of federal, state, local, and nonprofits. And this is just a partial list. If I've left anybody out, I apologize. But that's not necessarily a one-stop shop. So if you have a resource concern and you're worried about it, where do you go first? And in Valley District, go to the district, go to the Conservation District, and their focus is on voluntary conservation. And they're a local 5-member board, locally elected. They all have their specific interests and specialities, but working through their district administrator, they help coordinate conservation efforts of all those different agencies that I just listed. So let's talk about some of their projects. And you can start at the top of the watershed and talk about land use, timber management, pasture and irrigation, and any of those resource concerns with that. Moving down, of course, pasture management is a big deal in Valley County, and looking at fencing, look at water developments and water troughs, dealing with those nutrients. How do you collect them? How do you handle them? How do you apply them and utilize them? Moving farther, and you start getting into the watersheds. What you do with old culverts that just don't provide the capacity, or in some cases are a little bit of a barrier for the aquatic organisms to pass through. Coming up with solutions to that. Moving on to protecting stream banks, and you've got kind of some low impact stream banks, best management practices for that, dealing with erosion, dealing with those nutrients getting into the water bodies. And you can go even taller banks or shoreline protection, those different management practices. Now, in all these different strategies, the district is a great place to start. They can work with all those different agencies and come up with solutions. So I was also asked to put in a quick plug for our loan program. It's one of the ones available out there. Talk with Terry Hobel-Heinrich with the commission. These loans, much like the EQIP program that Ron will speak to later, provide for conservation work on the ground. Ours is up to $600,000 with different loan rates. And the slides should be available after the show, and I'll put up the link here for talking to our person. But the takeaway from all this is to give Dorina a call, and she'll get you connected. So that was the basis of my presentation, and I'll throw it open for questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Bill. So Dorina is typing a response now, but you can probably speak to all the attendees. What are the water quality grants that are available, and where are they to be used?
All right. And talking to Dorina, we do have some money from the state. It's called the 319 program, and those address water quality. The one that Dorina's tapped into is for the Payette River system. Again, there's through the feds, through NRCS, and Ron will hit on this more later, there's money available. But there's always some money out there. A lot of times it's having us come out, look at your property, look at the specifics, and then we can look at what funding agencies are available. The Idaho Water Resources Board does quite a bit with dealing with, like we had the storms last year, and we had a lot of culverts plugged, a lot of runoff issues for that, and they put a lot of money forward for that. So there's typically money out there. If it's not available right now, that's when you start writing grants and finding the money.
Excellent. Let's go to our attendees. Does anyone have a question for Bill?
Well, I think I got you back on schedule.
Oh man, we're cruising now. So let's see if nothing pops up. Why don't Gary, if you're ready, we'll go ahead and go to you, and then any extra time we'll tag on to the end of the presentations as a whole, maybe for some additional Q&A. All right, so Gary, Bill, thank you again for your time and your presentation, and we're gonna go to Gary Brown. This session we're now starting is titled Conserve, Protect, and Restore Cold Water Fisheries and Watersheds. Gary Brown is within Trout Unlimited. Gary Brown is the chapter secretary of Trout Unlimited, Reed Gillespie chapter here in Valley County. He is an 18-year resident of Valley County and graduated from Oregon State University with a BS in forest management. He has a 39-year career in wildland and structural fire management, culminating on the Payette National Forest as the fire and aviation staff officer. Fishing has taken over his primary outdoor recreation, supported by camping, hiking, jeeping, and hunting. He has been known to use his fly rod more than binoculars during fall hunting days. Gary, thank you for joining us, and take it away.
All right, very nice. Thank you. Yeah, one of my best hunting trips I ever had was in Montana, and right on the Big Hole River, and we camped there for 2 weeks, and I had my fly rod literally hanging on top of the tent the whole time, and would fish or hunt about half an hour in the morning, then fish the rest of the day once the hatches started. It was a lot of fun. So appreciate everybody, and I really want to thank the sponsors for this group. It's this is a great session that we have going on, and I really look forward to it. So I normally like to speak in front of audiences. So my wife helped me out. I've got audiences right here. They don't show up very well on the camera, but I'm going to put you guys right up here so we can see you, and hopefully you don't fall down during the presentation here. But just so you know, that way I can look at the camera instead of looking down at stuff. I do have a handful of slides here, so we're going to share that real quick and go from there. There we go. Okay, So yeah, Gary Brown, here's our chapter here in McCall, and we'll just jump right into this. So to conserve, protect, and restore North Americans' cold water and fisheries and their watersheds, that is the Trout Unlimited mission statement. So that's kind of what we want to base everything on as we move forward. So this is our busiest slide of the day, and we'll kind of have to break this down a little bit. The approach that TU has is to protect, restore, and connect and sustain watersheds and fisheries, and kind of focus on the main areas of water management, watershed restoration, fisheries management, and land development. So for me, it really isn't about just the fish. It's about the whole basin, as many people have talked about, especially Bill. It starts in the uplands because that's where the water comes from, particularly in our case right now, where we've got 5 some feet of water in our yard right now. So, and then what I really like about Trout Unlimited is the approach is through a collaborative process. It's really, and they really drive the point home in the TU webpage about don't just do this on your own. You got to be collaborative. You got to work with partners. We don't want to produce benefits that aren't that don't benefit everybody. We're not after sole fish benefits. We're after community watershed benefit type things. So just a brief history. Trout Unlimited began in 1959 with 16 original members in Michigan, Grayling, Michigan, of all places. And the mantra there was to take care of the fish, and the fish will take care of itself. And what they were seeing back then was the fisheries departments were planting fish, and all they were catching were fish the same size. So kind of a real put and take kind of fishery, and they thought that they could move forward and have a little better fishery if they managed for that. So nationally, there's 400 chapters, 300,000 members. And in Idaho, there's 9 chapters and 2,500 members. We're one of the smallest chapters. There's some 200, 500 plus members, particularly over in Idaho Falls for the South Fork and whatnot. So pretty active in Idaho. Organizationally wise, there's the chapters. So it starts with the chapters. It starts with the local organizations. And then members from chapters get selected for state councils. And then members from state councils get selected for national councils. So the basis is it's not a top-down organization. It's literally run from the local chapters up to the national level, which makes it a much more user-friendly organization because everybody's pretty grounded. There are 230 plus or minus staff nationwide and at the state level. In Idaho, there's about a dozen folks in Boise. And those folks, there's the national science team down there. There's some folks that work with the legislature and that kind of stuff. So what's cool about it is, like Bill talked about support, we can get support for projects, GIS stuff and whatnot from Boise for our work up here. Let's see here. So the Reed Gillespie chapter, that's us here locally. Smaller chapter, one of the smallest ones in the state. Got about 100 members spread out between Valley, Adams, Washington, Southern Idaho counties. And so as you can tell, we're spread out, and actually the Zoomer thing has been good for us because we can actually talk with members that are, it's hard for them to drive to McCall all the time for meetings. So, so it's been good, other than we've been kind of inactive for the last year because of the ability to get together personally. So, but we're hoping that'll change in the next, in the coming months by summer. So the chapter is actually named after a gentleman named Reed Gillespie, who grew up in Valley County. His namesake is his community contributions, which one of them was stocking high mountain lakes with using large milk containers and packing them up the hill. A rather tough individual, I'd say. He was in the Oops, there goes one of our audience. Sorry about that. Put you over here. So he was in the Army in the Second World War, airborne ranger in Sicily, Italy, in Normandy. And he also worked for the Brown Tie and Lumber Company in Boise, Cascade. So pretty cool lineage with Reed. I am looking for a picture of him. So if anybody has a thought on where I could find a picture of Reed, nothing fancy, but it'd be great to have a picture of him, on some of these presentations. So our goal as a chapter is just to get more active in the community and be a part of moving things forward. Get more active in the collaboration things, doing clinics, banquets, those kinds of things. But most of all, we want to make a difference on the landscape. And we got a good group of guys, and we've got some younger folks that are coming on that I'm really impressed with, that are just dynamite, dynamite people, and they're really good fisher people as well. Not just guys too. It's both. So one of the concepts we have in fishing, many of you probably know this, is what we call the home waters. And these are a couple of fish that a member caught just a week ago, I think last weekend, or the last sunny day. It looks like we actually had some sun in this one. But these are right out of a local river that will remain nameless, but kind of connects to two lakes that we've been talking about. But these are some awesome fish that spend the winter in the watershed, and then summer down in Lake Cascade. And they're up here to spawn and make babies. So it's kind of a cool deal. And when our chapter got together a couple of years ago and talked about where do we want to go with our fisheries programs, the Payette River was it. And so our efforts are going to focus mainly on that river, with the addition of other projects that we have going on. The biggest fish I've caught down there was about 24 inches. So there are some beautiful fish there. The lakes, can't not talk about the lakes when you talk about home waters. To the bottom right, that's my wife with a fish we caught in the fall when I retired. That was one of the things that I love to do, or used to do, is get out on Cascade in the fall. And there were many a times that I would actually pass on going steelhead fishing in Riggins, and I would go to Lake Cascade because I was pretty much guaranteed to catch fish, and quality fish at that. And if you can get a bluebird day like that, it's a pretty fun deal. And the picture on the center, I found that on Facebook this weekend. These are a group of guys that grew up in Minnesota. They were in the military together. I'm not sure where they all live now. They had an awesome post with a bunch of pictures. These guys spent about, from what I could gather, 2 years preparing for a week-long trip in Cascade, ice fishing on the lake. You can tell they're pretty successful, so they probably know what they're doing when it comes to ice fishing, and they're well equipped, as you could tell from the other photos they posted. But these guys came and spent a week and fished, and kind of shows the destination nature of Lake Cascade. And there's two actual Facebook groups in Facebook. One of them is titled Ice Fishing Cascade, and then there's the Western Ice Fishing Association. And they both talk about Lake Cascade, extensively. And there's quite the tourist attraction. There's folks from all the Midwest states in particular, and around the world. Canadians come down when the borders open, and it's turned into a destination blue ribbon perch fishery, if you will. And so it's pretty cool, and it's got to impact the local community, which is good to see. And for me and for TU, it's actually pretty cool that people are interested in the fisheries like this. It gives the fisheries, and these fish in particular, a place at the table when it comes to environmental and resource type issues, because these things are making a difference in the local community and the economics of the area. So it's good to see, particularly the Chamber of Commerce, the sponsors, and I know that they recognize these benefits. So it's pretty cool. We'll see where they go. I think they're going to increase over time and fluctuate. That's how fish species happen, but it'll be fun to see. Excuse me. So a couple of projects that we're going to focus on. Bill actually came out and looked at this project with us. Heinrich Lane, right down Hat Ranch is right down in the middle. Hat Ranch is right in here. That Moon Ridge that Craig talked about is up here on the north end of the photograph. This is a piece of BLM ground right down here, and this is some Simplot land right down in here, right on the Payette River. Black Hawk is on the west side of the river. Here's a picture down, kind of looking into the project area, and you can see the cut bank and the sloughing that's going on. This road, this bank is pushing its way towards the road, and every year the water comes down from left to right and pushes up against that and scours it out a little bit. So this is a project area that we'd like to jump into as we can get organized a little more. You'll see a couple signs right here in the middle, and those signs are on the picture on the right. And you can see the stream right here, the intermittent stream that crosses and that carries sediment and whatnot. And what's interesting about this little stream is there is a cut in it that's backing up towards the road. So as the water comes down, there's about a 2-foot cut, and that cut will continue to back up the drainage over time as more water comes down. And so eventually this road's going to actually get closed on its own, because the road's going to bottom out, and then people are going to continue to try to four-wheeler their way through it, and it'll continue to tear it up. So this would be a great little catch for a culvert or some hardening of some sort that could benefit it. And as far as the cut in the left picture, this is an old photograph of some TU work, but this is just one option that could be done to kind of stabilize it, along with planting willows and things like that. So another project that we want to do, and this is one we're looking really forward to, working with the Idaho Fish and Game, and that's to actually tag some of those adfluvial fish. So an adfluvial fish is a fish that comes out of a freshwater lake and goes up into a drainage to spawn and then back down again. And so we would propose to catch a dozen or so, or 20, as many tags as we can get, and put those tags. Fishing, we would catch them, Fish and Game would put the tags in them, and then we track them over time through a few fixed locations, and then some roving float trips where we can find the fish, and then just use that for management needs in the future. Identify where the fry are surviving or rearing, and that kind of stuff. Because one of the issues, as you saw earlier, is water temperature. And so if we know where the fry are living, then we can try to figure out how to add more shade to that piece of the world to try to give it a little better survival. So things like that. Those are the kind of things that we want to do in the future, in addition to the community and school kind of stuff as well. So, but I'm excited. It's a great little organization to work for. A lot of good folks in it. I've learned a lot just through this. As you can tell, all my experience has been on the upland side, so it's fun to get in and learn something new about the watershed side of it, and the stream stuff, and fisheries, habitats, and that kind of thing. So I think that's really all I have. There are some great information out there. The TU website itself has a lot of information. We have a TU or a Reed Gillespie Trout Unlimited website that's kind of nested in that. And then the Reed Gillespie, there's a Facebook page that we have as well. And that's my contact information if anybody wants anything from me. But if you want to sign up for TU, just jump into the main TU website. You can join in right there, and then you'll kind of get married up with our chapter and start getting emails, and we'll go from there. So with that, in the old slideshow here, and any questions? Trying to figure out.
Thank you, Gary. Yeah, that's great. I don't see anything in the Q&A yet, but got a few minutes. We can see what pops up.
That's
Um,
fine.
What it looks like a couple people might have a lead on some photos for you as well.
Okay, that would be awesome. I would love to have a picture of him just to be more be respectful for folks that have done a great job for us.
Certainly. I'm wondering, what's, from your point of view, what do you see as like Trout Unlimited's vision for the next, well, here we go. It says, David wants to know, there did not seem to be an emphasis on catch and release fishing for cold water fish. Is there some emphasis on this?
Oh yeah, it's huge, and our members pretty much catch and release on all the North Fork River, and I believe the way the regulations are written, it's catch and release from January 1st till Memorial Day anyway, so that's part of the regulation. But
Okay, welcome back to the Confluence Watershed Summit here for the North Fork Payette River Watershed. Ron Brooks is our next presenter. He works out of the USDA-NRCS Emmett field office. What that stands for is the U.S. Department of Agriculture Natural Resource Conservation Service. He is the team lead for Jim, Boise Valley, Adams, Washington, and Payette counties. Ron is going to be talking to us about EQIP, WaterSmart, and other water quality programs. Ron, take it away.
Hi, everybody. My name's Ron Brooks. I work for the Natural Resources Conservation Service out of our Emmett field office. I am the team lead there, formerly known as the district conservationist. I've been there since last fall. And today I'm going to present a slideshow on the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, most commonly known as EQIP. I'll provide a general overview of what the program is, how to be involved with the program, the process that we go through to accept and evaluate applications for the program, and then a little bit of history on what the program has done in the past in the Valley County area. What's EQIP for? Well, it's a program that provides financial and technical assistance to private landowners, ag producers, and non-industrial private forest land producers to implement conservation practices on their property. We are an agency through this program that promotes agriculture. We promote ag production and forest management along with environmental quality. Basically, what we're trying to do is help folks have better ag production, but also provide a conservation benefit at the same time and address resource concerns. How do we get involved with EQIP? We have an application form. This is the first step. It's the CCC 1200 form. It can be obtained online or at any NRCS office. We accept EQIP applications throughout the year. It's called a continuous sign up. But since we're a federal agency, we operate on a federal fiscal year. So soon after our federal fiscal year starts each year, which is October 1st, as soon as we can after that start of the fiscal year, we batch or collect all the applications we've received up to that point, and we start screening them, evaluating them, and ranking them to determine which of those applications are going to get an EQIP contract for that fiscal year's funding cycle. One of the first things we do after the application cutoff deadline is determine eligibility. There are eligibility requirements for EQIP, just like any other federal program. There's applicant eligibility provisions. There's also land eligibility provisions. And of course, there's resource concern eligibility where EQIP has to be, we can't enroll anybody in EQIP if we're not actually solving a natural resource issue or a problem. During that same time period, usually 30 days or so that we're determining eligibility for all our applications, we are also running those applications through a screening process. This is a very quick worksheet that we have available to us to look at each application, screen based on the eligibility, what resource concerns have we identified, are we going to be solving them or not, and just the nature of the application. And also, if that applicant happens to have participated in EQIP in the past, how did that contract go? Did it remain on schedule, for example, things of that nature. So after we screen each application, we assign them a score of high, medium, or low. And then the ones that do screen out high will move on to the next step of the process, which is ranking. So now we have eligible applications that are also high priority applications. So now they move into the ranking process. We have ranking tools set up, and they're much more extensive than the screening process is. We have ranking tools that are unique to each type of application. So we have, for instance, cropland ranking tools, pasture land ranking tools, forest land ranking tools. That way, applications are being ranked within common things in common with the other applications they're competing against. So we're not ranking a forestry application against a cropland application, because that just wouldn't be objective and equitable. So site visits, of course, all along this time, we're doing site visits. We're doing resource concern, preliminary engineering work. We have a multitude of resource assessment tools we can use and to evaluate the severity of resource concerns. We take into account the producer's objectives as well. We run it through the ranking process, and then each application will then end up with a ranking score. Along with that ranking score, we are also developing a cost estimate, which is an estimated cost to the EQIP program, not necessarily, not a total cost of the project, but just a cost estimate that it would cost the EQIP program if this were to become a contract. So then we submit all those ranking scores and cost estimates, and then we make decisions on which of the applications are going to rank high enough in order to be awarded an EQIP contract. Every year, we have way more applications than we have EQIP funding to cover. So once we find out which applications are going to get funded for a contract, then we begin the contract development part of the process, which includes scheduling each practice that's going to be implemented. It lists the amount of financial assistance that's going to be available for that practice. And then an appendix, which is a document that describes all the rules and regulations of the EQIP program that has to be reviewed with the participant and signed. So for Valley County, what type of actual conservation practices are typical that EQIP can help folks with? Now, this isn't an all-inclusive list, but this is some of the more typical ones we would use on pasture land in Valley County. So we certainly fencing. We do a lot of livestock water developments. That can be either pipelines out of an existing water source, a spring development. We do livestock wells, for instance, and then the whole system, the trough as well. We do irrigation systems on pasture land, and they can be improved surface systems or conversion to sprinkler systems, and then all the associated practices that accompany a system like that, such as pipelines, pumping plants, water control structures, so on and so forth. We do grazing management on pasture land. We can do riparian buffers if there are any adjacent waterways, and then pasture seedings as well. Forestry. Certainly we do forest work up in Valley County, and predominantly we get involved with pre-commercial thinning, forest site preparation. That's to like prepare a site if we're going to do a tree planting, maybe practices that'll help reduce weed competition, for instance. Slash treatment after a thinning, we help with treating that residue and slash. Tree plantings. And then on cropland, fairly similar to pasture land, in that we do irrigation systems and then the associated pipeline structures, pumping plants if needed. We do cover cropping on cropland for sure, and then associated management practices as well, such as irrigation water management, nutrient management, or pest management are also optional practices for cropland. Regardless of which conservation practice ends up in an EQIP contract, when it gets implemented, it has to be implemented according to NRCS standards and specifications. Every one of our practices in our technical guide has a standard and a specification which spells out how that practice has to be designed and then how that practice has to be implemented. So here's a little history, quick slide, just showing kind of what EQIP has done in Valley County over time. We've had 47 EQIP contracts in Valley County. We've obligated $840,000 total to those 47 contracts over time, and then enrolled 5,100 acres in the EQIP program under those 47 contracts. So each year we certainly get more applications each year in Valley County and all the others. And so we fund as many of them as we can. And this is kind of what we've done to date in Valley County. And hopefully we do more in the future. And that's it. That concludes my slides, and I'll be happy to take questions. Thank you.